So our lesson today is lesson 2-5, and our learning target for today is I can state the first two postulates and apply them to various situations. Now in the actual video itself, I hope that you're going to be able to kind of use the first one here, and we're just going to basically talk about the first two postulates, and then later on the actual homework themselves will we then apply them to various situations. Now before we get to what actually postulates are, it's going to help us to basically then kind of explore some different things that we've already explored before. So remember again, our definition of a definition is the exact ambiguous explanation of the meaning of a mathematical word or phrase. So again, if you think about our definition of a square, it says a square is a two-dimensional figure with equal sides and two right angles, and four right angles. And so definitions are important because then we're allowed to basically then explore different situations with them. But sometimes it's impossible to define everything, and you'll find out here in a second why that's true. There are certain words that make it impossible, and point is kind of one of them, because again, if you actually looked up point in the definition with the idea of geometry in mind, basically the only property of a point is location. And so if you looked up location in the dictionary, it would say it was defined as a site or situation. And so if you looked up site, it would be defined as the place or setting of an event. And so if we looked up place, it's defined as a definite location, which then all of a sudden creates this loop. All right. And so if we actually were going to define point, we'd never actually get down to an ending point, as I would say. Maybe the pun's intended. But again, as you can see, there's just this circle here, and then all of a sudden we would define location, and it would take us right back to here. And so we have to create this idea, this definition of a point, and not necessarily be able to prove what that actually means. I'll come up here within a second. As I said, sometimes it's impossible to prove everything as well, so sometimes it's hard to define things. But then with proving, you have to start somewhere. So again, relating it to, defining something, we have our definitions. But proving something, right, we actually have to start with what's called a postulate, which is a statement that is assumed to be true without proof. We basically take these statements to be true without basically saying, well, why is that true? Because if we start to say that, then we're going to end up with that loop around, and basically it's never going to end. So again, if you want to write down postulate, again, tomorrow I'm going to looking at basically just you writing down the definitions, because these are important. So please get these down in your notes. Now the reason we have postulates is because it would be impossible to prove everything, as we've already stated before. Again, you don't need to write this down, all right? But again, I would get the postulate definition down. Now, relating to what we've again talked about before with theorems, is statements that are proved by reasoning deductively from already accepted statements. Now, again, theorems we've proved. We can actually prove those from our statements, from statements that we've already assumed to be true. Now again, if we keep whittling it down from one theorem to the next, we're going to end up with statements that basically haven't been proved yet, which we call postulates. So again, every theorem, or basically every branching of when we come off from theorems, have started with postulates, or they've started with basically already accepted, if I go back real quick, basically already accepted statements that we haven't necessarily proved, but are assumed to be true. Now the two that basically we're going to be needing in class today, so I would get these down definitely, these are super important, is postulate number one, is 2 points determine a line. Again, we start off with, if we can think about the definition of a point, as we said, it just kind of goes into a circle. Well, we had to start somewhere with, that's a point, so what's a line? And we're just basically going to assume that 2 points determine a line. Postulate number two says that three, this is important, non-collinear points determine a plane. So the line makes sense. We have a point and we have a point, and then we draw a straight line in between there. Okay, 3 non-collinear points we've talked about determine a plane. So that's that flat surface. That's that white border. That's that's the floor. Remember, everybody's feet are points, and so we really only need 3 points in order to determine a plane, whether that seems to be flat like the floor or the whiteboard, or it's tilted like we've seen in some of the other previous problems that we've done. So again, this is pretty much all that I have for you today. I just want you to be able to get these definitions down, and then tomorrow we will go through some homework problems that will be related to it. All right, so thank you for listening, and we will see you next class period.